Spoilers ahead. Watch out, and take care. The movie begins in 1972, during the final days of the Vietnam War. Amid a battlefield strewn with the bodies of fallen soldiers, an American soldier named Nick Parker emerges as a survivor, though he has lost his eyesight. Disoriented, he stumbles through a dense marsh, in search of his friend and fellow soldier, Frank Devereaux. However, Nick is soon ensnared in a trap, and captured by local villagers. When Nick regains consciousness, he finds himself in a Vietnamese village. Contrary to his expectations, the villagers are not hostile. They tend to his injuries and treat his blindness with herbal remedies. A local man, seeing potential in Nick, takes him under his wing, and begins training him in hand-to-hand combat and swordsmanship. Over the course of several months, Nick hones his remaining senses, particularly his hearing, allowing him to navigate his surroundings, and detect danger with remarkable precision. 20 years later, Nick has returned to the United States, now living as a retired veteran. Despite his blindness, he moves with confidence, using a cane that cleverly doubles as a sheath for his sword. One afternoon, while dining at a local diner, he witnesses a group of drunken men harassing a woman. When her purse falls near him, he can't ignore the injustice. With swift and precise movements, he defeats the bullies, using the combat skills he perfected years ago. Meanwhile, life has taken a darker turn for Frank Devereaux. After the war, he married a woman named Lynn, and together they had a son, Billy. For a time, they lived comfortably in Reno, Nevada, where Frank worked as a chemical engineer. However, his life spiraled out of control when he became addicted to gambling at a Las Vegas casino, owned by the notorious drug lord, Kevin McCready. To pay off his mounting debts, he began working as an underground chemist for McCready, producing raw materials for illegal drugs. His descent into addiction and crime led him to leave his wife for Annie, a waitress at the same casino. Frank's choices have ultimately led him down a path of self-destruction. Years pass, and Frank becomes increasingly disillusioned with his role in producing drugs that ruin countless lives. Determined to break free, he refuses to continue his work for the drug lord, McCready, despite the lingering debt that binds him. But McCready's henchmen are ruthless. They hang Frank upside down from the top of their casino, threatening him to produce a massive batch of designer drugs for an upcoming high-stakes deal. When he still refuses, McCready devises a cruel plan. He orders the kidnapping of Frank's ex-wife, Lynn, and their son, Billy, to force his compliance. Meanwhile, Nick arrives at Lynn's home, hoping to reconnect with his old friend Frank. Lynn welcomes him in, and they chat over tea. She reveals that she and Frank divorced years ago, and he now lives across the country in Reno, with whom she hasn't had contact for years. Just then, a loud knock interrupts their conversation. She answers the door, to find two policemen demanding to speak with Billy, claiming he's a potential eyewitness to a crime. Nick's heightened senses pick up something off about the situation. When he questions the officers, and asks for a warrant, they don't respond. Instead, Slag, a hulking figure, who is actually McCready's right-hand man, grabs Lynn by the throat. Billy rushes to help his mother, but Slag brutally throws him aside, slamming him into a wall, and knocking him unconscious. Without hesitation, Slag then shoots Lynn. This brutal act triggers Nick's fury. Despite his blindness, he swiftly unsheathes his sword, and unleashes a devastating attack. He takes down the corrupt policeman with deadly precision, and manages to wound Slag, but the thug narrowly escapes, setting the stage for a future confrontation. With the immediate danger over, he rushes to Lynn's side, but it's too late, she's dying. In her final moments, she begs him to look after Billy, and he solemnly agrees. When Billy regains consciousness, Nick lies, telling him his mother is still at home, and insists they must leave for Nevada, to find his father. As they head to the bus station for a cross-country journey, Frank reads in the newspaper about Lynn's death and Billy's disappearance. Realizing McCready is behind it, he reluctantly agrees to return to his work, setting the stage for an inevitable showdown. Meanwhile, Billy and Nick's journey gets off to a rocky start. The young boy is visibly uncomfortable with his new travel companion, often mocking Nick's blindness. At night, Billy attempts to sneak a look inside Nick's wallet, while he sleeps, but Nick, with his heightened senses, easily catches him in the act, and surprisingly lets him continue. Billy finds an old black and white photograph of his father and Nick from their army days, which piques his curiosity. He asks Nick how he lost his eyesight, prompting a flashback. The flashback reveals Nick, Frank and their infantry, celebrating their last day in Vietnam before returning home. Their celebration was abruptly cut short, when their base came under attack by Vietnamese rebels. Frank was supposed to provide cover, while Nick snuck close to enemy lines, to neutralize the threat. However, the plan backfired when the rebels ambushed them from both sides. In the chaos, Frank ran for cover, leaving Nick exposed. A mortar exploded nearby, severely injuring Nick, and permanently blinding him. Despite this, Nick harbors no ill will toward Frank. Back in the present, the duo's bus stops at a gas station, near a vast cornfield. Billy seizes the opportunity to call home, desperate to hear his mother's voice. Nick intercepts him, and finally reveals the heartbreaking truth. Feeling betrayed and overwhelmed with grief, Billy bolts into the cornfield. Nick follows, desperately trying to keep up, but soon loses him in the thick maze of crops. Unbeknownst to them, Slag and his goons have been tracking them. Slag captures Billy, and drags him to a makeshift hut, in the middle of the field, while his men hunt down Nick. But Nick, despite his blindness, methodically eliminates the henchmen one by one. He then makes his way to the hut, where Slag is holding Billy. Slag spots him and fires a shotgun, but Nick, relying on his keen hearing, dodges the bullets. As Slag reloads, Nick uses the distraction to sneak under the hut, slashing one of its supporting pillars. The structure collapses, and he swiftly attacks Slag with his sword. Grabbing Billy, he flees the cornfield, leaving the damaged hut behind. However, Slag survives the assault, thanks to a protective vest he had been wearing. The news of this failure reaches MacReady, who grows increasingly furious. Frank, unaware of the true situation, continues to work overtime, believing his son has been captured. In reality, MacReady has neither Billy nor Nick, who have been causing all sorts of trouble. With their bus long gone, they spend the night by the riverside. As they sit by the water, Billy finally allows himself to mourn the loss of his mother, crying inconsolably. Nick, deeply affected, feels the weight of his own sorrow, but is unable to shed tears, as the mortar explosion that took his sight also destroyed his tear glands. The next morning, they hitch a ride, and arrive at Frank's home in Reno. Billy, emotionally distraught, hesitates to go inside, believing his father hates him. Nick encourages him to forgive past mistakes, and give life another chance. When they knock on the door, Annie warmly welcomes them in. However, Nick immediately senses something is wrong. His instincts prove correct when two of MacReady's men, Lyle and Tector, ambush them inside. Lyle swiftly knocks Nick unconscious, while Tector restrains Billy. They load the two into a van, with a reluctant Annie in tow. As the van heads toward Vegas, Nick regains consciousness, and hears the sound of Tector tossing his cane out of the van. The cane bounces on the asphalt, and lands by the roadside. Nick asks Billy to remember the location. Acting quickly, he instructs Billy to grab a lighter from his pocket, and they set fire to a nearby jute sack, filling the van with smoke. Annie, desperate to help, distracts the kidnappers as the smoke spreads. Lyle is forced to pull over, giving Nick the chance to overpower both of them. Annie then takes control of the van, and drives them back to Reno. After stopping to retrieve Nick's cane, they are ambushed again by the two, who have stolen a car from an elderly couple. In the ensuing chaos, Nick accidentally breaks Annie's glasses. As the situation escalates, he takes the wheel, and Billy helps navigate a wild chase through the busy streets. The pursuit ends when Nick slams the pursuer's car into oncoming traffic. Though Lyle and Tector survive the crash, they lose track of Nick and Billy. Annie takes Nick and Billy to an RV owned by her friend Colleen, where they rest and recover. The next morning, Nick decides to confront MacReady alone, in Vegas, determined to save Frank. Before leaving, Billy wakes up and begs him to stay, even calling him uncle, showing that he has grown to care for him. Nick, however, reassures and promises to return with his father. In Vegas, he infiltrates MacReady's casino, and overhears the drug lord planning to kill Frank, after an important deal at a ski resort. Later, he sneaks into the casino's penthouse, where he forces the deputy manager, Vince, to reveal Frank's location. After learning that Frank is in a lab, on the other side of the casino, he knocks Vince out, and reunites with his old friend. Frank confesses his guilt over what happened in Vietnam, but Nick assures him he holds no grudges, and urges him to reunite with his son. Before leaving, Frank sabotages the drug lab, destroying MacReady's operation. The two then head to Colleen's RV, only to find her dead, and Billy kidnapped. A note left behind instructs them to bring the drugs to MacReady's mountain penthouse, in exchange for Billy and Annie. Fully aware it's a trap, they prepare for battle, arming themselves with makeshift napalm bombs. The two friends make their way to the mountaintop, via a cable car, using their military training to take down the men. They storm the penthouse, where MacReady is holding Billy and Annie at gunpoint. MacReady, anticipating their arrival, has hired a Japanese assassin. In a brutal sword fight, Nick ultimately defeats the assassin, electrocuting him in a hot tub. Just as the fight seems over, Slag sneaks in and shoots Nick in the shoulder, taunting him for being blind. But this only gives him enough time to hurl his sword, impaling Slag. MacReady tries to intervene, but Frank tackles him, and the two struggle over a shotgun. In the scuffle, MacReady accidentally shoots himself, ending his reign of terror. In the aftermath, Frank is reunited with his family, and they prepare to leave for San Francisco. Nick, however, decides not to join them. As he crosses the street, disappearing into the crowd, Billy chases after him, begging him to stay. But Nick, having made his decision, asks him to take care of his family. As Billy throws a toy dinosaur off a bridge, Nick catches it. Billy calls out to Nick one last time, saying he'll miss him dearly. The end. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this. Turn on the notifications, and leave a like to help the channel out.